Welcome to the Dental Marketing Guy Show. I'm Justin, the Dental Marketing Guy, and today I have a very important guest. You're going to want to hear what he has to say because he has helped practices like yours dealing with embezzlement. You may have an issue and not even know it. There could be a thief in your dental practice. David Harris has been interviewed on the subject of embezzlement by every leading dental publication. He is also a prolific writer and author of a dozen or more articles annually that appear in major dental publications. David has lectured at several US and Canadian universities in matters having to do with business, law, and dentistry. And man, it is such a huge honor to introduce you. David, how are you?
I'm great, Justin, and you?
I'm doing great. I'm really wanting to delve into this. I know you've got some great information, but I was hoping you could maybe before we get into some actionable tips, I was hoping you could kind of tell me the story of how you became, is it dentalembezzlement.com?
That's our website, yeah, dentalembezzlement.com.
Yeah, so maybe you could tell our viewers just the story of how you came to come into that sphere of things and how you help dentists.
I guess I'd like to say that I had a master plan, that I saw an opportunity, and that I went for it. But the truth is a little bit different. I got into investigating dental embezzlement completely by accident. Was before I got into this field, I was in the Army. I taught some university, worked for a bank. I was I'd left my job at the bank. I was sitting at home and thinking about what I was going to do next when I who happened to be a dentist. And he said to me, "I think my front desk person's stealing from me, and I really don't know who to call." So I wasn't doing anything that week. So I said, "No problem. I'll meet us after work and we'll get to the bottom of it." So I went over to his office. This was 1989. So back in the days before most dentists were computerized, it was the old pegboard system that was in use. And I went to his office. We saw what she was doing, which was kind of rudimentary by the standards of embezzlement today. And fired, and I went back to watching TV, and I didn't think anything more of it until 2 weeks later. And 2 weeks later, I was going into my own dentist office for an appointment, and I was about to go through the front door, and I looked through the glass, and sitting there at the reception was the same woman that we fired at the other office 2 weeks before.
Wow.
Talk about coincidence. So I turned around, I sprinted to the nearest payphone because in 1989, cell phones were pretty big. And I called the office. I got put through to the doctor on a pretext, and I told him about what was going on at his front desk. And he asked me in this very panicked voice, "What the heck do I do now?" And about halfway through my second sentence, he'd hired me. And by the time I finished his work, two other dentists, that's how I got started. So I didn't choose dentistry at all. It chose me.
Excellent, excellent. And so since that time, you've done some amazing things for practices. I don't even know if you know the dollar figure that you've saved ostensibly lots of money for dentists like those viewing this show. Maybe you could tell us some really quick tips as far as here's three quick tips or two or three quick tips as to how you can avoid embezzlement, how you can resolve a situation, what to do if you suspect it. I'll let you have the floor on those quick tips.
Not be as quick as you hope. The big thing is a little bit, and we all want to analogize to other types of crime. You know, when you put in a burglar alarm system in your house, it's very effective at protecting your house. But it does that not because it stops burglary, but because it redirects it to some other victim. And what we want to assume, Justin, is that the same thinking to embezzlement, and it won't. The difference between embezzlement and burglary. In breaking into houses, you can choose your victim. In embezzlement, you can't. In embezzlement, the victim is preordained. So if you're a dentist and I work for you and my plan is to steal, and I come up with an approach, but you have blocked it, I don't then move on to some other victim. I move on to some other approach. So the idea that we can prevent embezzlement, we can lock practices down so that they don't get stolen from is fallacious. And in terms of tips, that's the first tip. When embezzlers, and most embezzlers have worked in the practice for a long time. You know, we have this picture of you make a hiring mistake and the next week they start stealing. And sometimes that happens. But the majority of embezzlers are long-term employees, and they probably had no intention of embezzling when they were hired, and then they come in one day and start stealing. So they're doing that with the knowledge of what the dentist looks at and how he or she thinks. And I sometimes as a crime of navigation, it's finding your way around your boss's scrutiny so that you can steal. So I think prevention is impossible. Does that mean that dentists are powerless against embezzlement? Of course not. There are lots of things we can do. The first thing we can do is we can force embezzlers into higher risk kinds of ways of stealing. And for the most part, that involves some basic checking. I know a lot of dentists who, for example, don't look at their day end report at the end of the day. Where I think dentists should focus is on not the concept that we can prevent this, but that if it's happening, we need to know about it. So we start with some really basic checking. Look at the day sheet at the end of every day. Most dentists believe that a month end is something that staff do, and they really have no particular involvement in. Whereas I think there are some specific things that a doctor should be looking at every month end to see if things are amiss. Now, none of this will stop embezzlement, but it will shut down the easiest ways to steal and force people into things that take a little more creativity and carry a lot more risk. Embezzlement is a very premeditated crime. It is conceived by somebody who knows their boss really well, knows how they think, and exploits that knowledge to commit a crime that they consider to be undetectable. So it is not an impulsive crime. It is a well-planned one.
Kind of put myself in the shoes of our listeners. If I'm a dentist and I suspect that maybe some numbers are a little fuzzy in the office, or I'm a little bit underwhelmed by the dollars in the bank account versus maybe production, and so I'm starting to suspect that maybe something is amiss. I don't want to believe that Susie at the front desk, who's been there for 20 years, is any cause of it. But that's always a possibility. What would you say? What's a good first step for a dentist in this frame of mind to kind of go forward? I mean, are there steps that they can take themselves to kind of figure things out? Should they contact you? What's the good first step?
I'll tell you the wrong step. Step is to do something that lets Susie know that you suspect her. If I'm a thief and I think I'm about to get caught, and I think that getting caught is going to have serious consequences, then the normal rules that apply to civilized behavior probably don't apply to me at that moment. I had a call about 7 years ago from a dentist. He suspected embezzlement. We chatted for about 15 minutes, and he decided that he could save some money if he did his own investigation. What he ended up doing as a consequence was tipping off the suspect to the fact that she was about to get caught. And her response was very simple. She came back that night with a can of gasoline and burned down the office.
Oh, wow.
Making very sure that every single backup medium was right next to the computer when she lit the match. So, and the dentist said to me afterwards with some ruefulness in his voice, well, that was a bit of a false economy. The danger that I have, and I'd like to encourage your audience to become instant private investigators and to be able to, and to tell them some things that they could do, but it's a very dangerous course. And there really aren't any particular limits as to what embezzlers might do. And I'll illustrate this as follows. In 2012, a woman in Baltimore, Maryland, pled guilty to murdering the dentist from whom she'd been embezzling. Her name is Shante Joyner Hickman. She worked for a dentist named Dr. Albert Rowe. She was embezzling from him, and she thought she was going to get caught. So she came back one night when she knew Dr. Rowe would be in the office. She brought her cousin with her for some muscle, and the two of them dragged Dr. Rowe into the washroom, beat him to death. The worst part, Justin, is that the amount she had embezzled was $17,000.
Wow.
So a huge caution to your audience. If you suspect, you probably need help. There are ways to gather information surreptitiously, but they take a fair amount of skill. And there are options that people have. Their CPA may be able to assist them. They may be able to get help from the company that makes their practice management software, or they can go to a specialized investigation firm like ours. But the do-it-yourself approach is a huge minefield. And I'd encourage some caution. One thing that we offer is that we have something called an embezzlement risk assessment questionnaire, and it's a way for somebody to get a little bit of validation as to whether what they're seeing is actually embezzlement or it might be something else. So this questionnaire is 37 questions. It is, they're yes or no questions. It would take a dentist typically 10 to 15 minutes to complete. And at the end of that process, they get a score, and the score gives them a pretty good indicator as to whether they have an embezzlement problem or not. So if somebody's got suspicion and they want to kind of do a bit of a low-level investigation, that would be the first step.
Okay.
And I can send you this. This is something we don't charge for, but I'm happy to make the questionnaire available to your audience for some period of time, and I can send you the link and a promo code after if you like.
Excellent. That sounds great. I really appreciate you doing that, David. That is, it's pretty serious. I think a lot of our viewers may think, oh, well, things like embezzlement and certainly things like murder are very unlikely to happen. But what would you say, how many dentists, and I don't know if this stat can even be reliably put out by you or anyone, but just kind of curious, what percentage of dental offices do you think are being embezzled and the dentist doesn't even suspect
it? You're right. That is a difficult one. What we do know is that about 60% of dentists, 60% of dentists will eventually be embezzled. So it's safe states that probably somewhere between 10 and 12,000 offices will be embezzled this year. In terms of embezzlement that happens that is not detected, I mean, there's just no way of knowing. The typical embezzlement goes on for about 2.5 to 3 years before it gets caught. So, yeah, if you wanted to take the 10 to 12,000 per year and string that out, assume that each one lasts about 2.5 years, then yeah, you've got somewhere in the 20,000 offices range where embezzlement's going to take place for some period of time before it's detected.
And as far as, your story, we're going to come to a close here in just a minute, but your story is really alarming because, you went to your dentist and here's this lady who just got fired for embezzlement. I'm assuming there was no conviction on record that the doctor could have checked before he hired her. Nowadays, I mean, what would you say, how can dentists screen employees I mean, just a simple background check? Is it how can dentists prevent hiring someone who actually has a history? Say there's not even a conviction, because it can be tough to convict people for these types of crimes sometimes. Your help definitely helps with that. But you know, I was wondering, like, how can I'm a dentist. I'm watching this show. What can I do to screen potential employees?
The first is that these two events happened 2 weeks apart. In other words, she was fired at the first office, and 2 weeks later, I was in the second office for my appointment. Sometimes people don't appreciate how long the criminal justice process takes. And the typical interval between when somebody's fired in an office for embezzlement and when they get convicted of a crime could be 3 to 4 years. So in that period of time, a criminal background check won't yield any results. I'll give though that, and I've asked thousands of dentists in presentations, you know, can I please see a show of hands as to how many of you enjoy hiring people? Nobody ever puts up their hand. Dentists absolutely despise that process. And when they find somebody who looks perfect, every ounce of skepticism leaves their brain and they hire them. So the first thing I'd say is statistically 1 in 4 adults in the United States has a criminal record. And every dentist hiring should bear that in mind. It astounds me, Justin, that I can get a wage at FedEx or UPS moving parcels around only if I pass a drug test. But yet I will venture that virtually every employee of every dentist who's tuned into this podcast does not drug test employees when they hire them.
Huh.
Another thing that's really important is to speak with former employers. And I'll give a tip here for your audience. A lot of resumes list former employers and they also put the phone numbers. Don't ever call those phone numbers. So if I say that I worked for Dr. Smith in Peoria, don't call the number I give you, because it might be one of those disposable cell phones that one of my relatives is answering and will give me a good reference. Go to your favorite online search, find the number for Dr. Smith in Peoria, and call that number. We've seen a lot of people hide a checkered past that way. The other thing that you run into is somebody who's applying for a job and they say, please don't contact my current employer because they don't know I'm leaving. And there are two possibilities. One is that it's true. The other is that they were actually fired by their previous employer 2 weeks ago, and they're just using this as smokescreen because they don't want you to call that employer, or they know they won't get a job. So the way that we deal with that one is simple. You say to that employee, I understand that completely. And what we will do is we will complete the rest of the screening process. And at that point, if we're ready to hire you, we'll make you a written job offer. And the written offer will lay out all the terms, but with one condition. And the condition is that we speak with your current employer. This is a great way of triaging, because if that person has already been fired, they're not going to jump through the other hoops to get hired, knowing that they're going to hit a brick wall at the end. On the other hand, if it's a legitimate thing and they have not yet told their current employer that they're leaving to take a job with you, then they'll keep going. But that will typically stop the liars right there. So in terms of hiring, that's what you can be doing. But you need to approach hiring with a skepticism. You need to know that 60% of resumes have false information on them. 25% of adults have criminal records. There's a further group of adults, as we discussed, who have committed a crime but just haven't been convicted yet.
Did you say 25%? So 1 in 4 people have a criminal record?
1 in 4 U.S. adults has a criminal record. About 60 million adults in the U.S. have a criminal record. Now, some of these criminal records do not make people unemployable. I mean, if you live in Colorado and you were convicted of marijuana possession 25 years ago, I'm not sure that's a barrier to hiring you today. So the mere fact that somebody has a criminal record doesn't mean they shouldn't be hired. It means that further investigation is needed, and the doctor needs to understand what really happened.
Does that include like traffic or? I mean, that seems like a lot, 1 in 4. Yeah, is that like misdemeanors and above, or?
No, it's that would be offenses typically under a state penal code or the federal criminal statutes. So in terms of driving, speeding wouldn't do it, but DWI would.
Okay. Wow. Well, that's really interesting. And then a lot, like you said, a lot of times the legal process in the criminal justice systems, there's so many safeguards protecting individuals from having their constitutional rights infringed that it takes a lot of time to sort through that process. And that's, man, this is, I mean, I've heard some numbers from you that I am a little surprised by. Uh, you are the expert on this. Dentalembezzlement.com. Here's what we're going to do for the listeners is we're going to put a link below in the YouTube description and on the Dental Marketing Guy blog, and you're going to be able to go to that form for free for a limited time only. So if you hear this episode, please take action on that now. If you think you might, here we have 60% of dental offices will at some point, experience some sort of embezzlement. So that's what, 10 to 12,000 offices this year. You could be one of those offices. So let's take action on this. It sounds like it only takes 10, 15 minutes, and it could be the best 10 or 15 minutes you ever spend in your life in terms of saving what you've earned. So, man, David Harris from dentalembezzlement.com, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be here. Thank you, Justin.
Cool. Yeah. And so to all our listeners, we're going to put that link below. Thank you for listening to the Dental Marketing Guy Show.